Welcome to the Multiracialverse. Hello, hi, hey.
Welcome to Episode 2 of the Multiracialverse podcast. I am your host, Antonio Fernandez. In this episode, we delve into the vibrant canvas of Sara Baumann's biracial experiences. Sara is the visionary force behind Women in Weapons, which amassed $17 million in sales, earning her admiration from distinguished entrepreneurs and celebrities like Gary Vaynerchuk and Steve Aoki. In a male-dominated tech landscape, Sara embodies resilience, strength, and artistry, intertwining her Iranian American heritage into a vivid narrative showcasing resilience and innovation. Sara's presence shines, a beacon encouraging women to embrace their power in this traditionally male-oriented domain. Her strides echo a relentless rhythm of progress, catalyzing change in a field often lacking diversity. Prepare to delve into the life experiences and work of Sara Baumann, a maestro inspiring a new generation of boundary-breaking creators in this mixed-up, multiracial verse we inhabit. Hello, Sara. Welcome to the Multiracialverse. How are you doing today?
I am so good, Antonio. Thank you so much for having me on. I am ecstatic about this interview today.
Awesome. I have to say that I have to step back because I get excited about talking to artists and inspirational individuals such as yourself. So let's just jump right in. I think probably one of the most pressing questions is, where did your nickname Sparky come from?
Yeah, it's so funny. People think that I made it up on the spot or something, but my last name actually used to be Sparks. And so pretty much from the time I was 4 in gymnastics, my nickname was Sparky in gymnastics. And then throughout high school and college, my nickname was Sparky because obviously I was born in the 90s and everybody and their sister's name was Sara. And then of course I got to the hospital system, which is where I worked prior to my art career. And a bunch of Saras in our department. And so my director started calling me Sparky and it just really, really stuck that time, especially. So it's been a nickname that's been with me for forever now.
It's kind of fitting of your personality though, right?
I would say so. I mean, Sparky, spunky, you name it. Pretty much anything that's a little bit poppy, I think fits very well with my hyper energetic personality. And this is only me on one coffee today.
Right on. So please share a little bit about your background. We're here to talk more today about you as the individual and you as a person, your culture. Tell me a little bit about where you grew up, your parents, and some of maybe your younger life that not a lot of people might know.
Well, I am half Iranian, and the other half of me is predominantly of European descent, essentially. But I was born and raised in Dallas, Texas. My mom immigrated to the United States in 1979 during the regime change in Iran. And then my dad, of course, was born and raised here. My parents, they raised me until about 10 years old, and that's when they got divorced. And then I would say the majority of the raising was on my mom's side. I spent a lot of time in Iran growing up. Pretty much every 2 years, I would spend anywhere between a month and a half to 2 months in the summertime seeing my family in Iran. The vast majority of my family still lives there. And I think that's probably a big reason for why a lot of my identity has a tendency to lean more towards my Iranian heritage. I think that's always been where I've felt the warmest welcome from my family. That's where I've felt a lot of belonging is within my Iranian culture and my Iranian family. And it's been a little bit of a wild ride. I've been born and raised in Texas. It's where I still am. And growing up throughout the early 2000s, especially after 9/11, was kind of a weird time to be a Middle Eastern kid. I think probably now that I've gotten older, I tend to blend in with a lot more people. But when I was younger, I was a lot darker, a lot hairier, all of it. And so certainly got picked on for being a quote unquote terrorist and what have you. I had the mom with the accent. I had the weird lunches at school and all of it. But as I've grown up, I've really grown to be very proud of my heritage, my Iranian heritage. And it's something that I wear kind of as a badge of honor, and not as much because of how much I love my family and how much I want to share the world about them, but also the fact that I want to share with the world what Iranian heritage means to me, that it's not what you see on the news. It's actually all these beautiful things that I've seen as I've grown up.
That's beautiful. That's really beautiful. And so growing up in your household, was there definitely was it more Iranian as far as the culture of the house? Or was there, like with some immigrants, when they come over, they tend to like, okay, we're going to assimilate you, so you're assimilated into this culture and we don't stand out as much. What did that look like for you?
For me, so whenever I was younger, especially whenever I was younger, my mom still had the mehmoonies, which are basically like Iranian parties at the house. And so a lot of her friends were Iranian, and they would all come over pretty much every single weekend. A lot of my friends were Iranian. And then I want to say probably after my parents got divorced, my mom really had to focus heavily on working and raising me. And so a lot of those mehmoonies kind of fell off. And then also, after 9/11, I think a lot of like the outward expression of my culture kind of decreased, just out of like protection from bullying or potential like dangerous encounters, with people who were, had the wrong types of beliefs about who we were. And so I feel like maybe a lot of that like heavy expression of my heritage kind of declined throughout the early 2000s, mid 2000s. And then whenever I hit the end of high school, beginning of college, I started to rejoin a group of fellow Iranian people like within my university. And I was a participant in what we had was called a Persian Student Society at the university. And that's where I think I really started to reconnect with my heritage. I spoke a lot of Farsi whenever I was a kid, and then that kind of died off like throughout my teens and everything. And then I picked that back up again early college as well. So it's been kind of like a roller coaster ride, honestly, with my heritage, just because of a lot of the things that happened within society and within specifically Western society, and the way that oftentimes Middle Eastern people were viewed. So that, and I think some of my personal life as well, just, with my parents getting divorced and, my mom raising me a lot of the time on her own, but also working a very full-time job. So it's been a bit of a roller coaster.
Yeah. It sounds like you answered like 3 questions that I had. Ask, what you spoke at home, and it sounds like you did speak Farsi some. How did that affect you psychologically as a kid when you were going to school prior to college, and you were going through some of these things where you kind of had to mask your identity? How did that affect you psychologically? And how did you talk to your mom about that at home?
Yeah, well, I think one of the weirdest things is that like I really just wanted to fit in, I think was the most important thing. I've grown up with anxiety pretty much my entire life, and I went from private school to charter school to then public school. And I think it was whenever I hit public school that I was very much like, this is a very different ecosystem than I'm accustomed to. And I feel like I am certainly not like fitting in, I think, with the vast majority of kids that are here, which as an adult is fine. Like I really enjoy kind of going against the grain as an adult. I don't mind that at all. But as a kid, when you're so sensitive and, you feel like people are making fun of you because of the way you look, because of how much hair you have on your arms and so on and so forth, all you want is to fit in. And so I felt like I kind of, really tried to just mask like whatever aspects of my identity, appeared to be like not just your typical European identity. I really didn't want to like put that too much on display because I didn't want to get picked on. Which, I mean, it still happened, unfortunately. There were still kids who like would pull up, for example, next to my husband and I. We've been together since we were in 8th grade, but like, the end of high school would pull up next to us in their truck and say, "Oh, so you're still dating the terrorist?" And, a lot of times that would be like a bit of a dagger to the heart, but also I feel like maybe some of those instances made me a little bit stronger in the person that I am. And so, if I were to give any like tips of advice to anybody, whether they're adult or kid or, not comfortable in their skin or whatever it is, like, I think it's so important to just focus on what brings you joy, whether that's showcasing your heritage, whether that's participating in your heritage or not. Whatever brings you joy, is ultimately what you're going to look back on years and years down the road and be like, I'm so glad that I did that. I'm so glad that I participated in that. I'm so glad that I showcased that, as opposed to going down the road and saying, man, I really wish I wouldn't have masked that. I really wish I wouldn't have hid that. That was so stupid. Why did I do that? Like, why did I try so hard to fit in? And I think that's kind of a place that I'm in a little bit, is like, I'm playing a little bit of that catch up where I'm like, I had so many opportunities to educate people back when I was in middle school and high school about my heritage and about the type of people that Iranian people are. They're not what you see in the news. But of course, being a kid trying to fit in, I didn't take those opportunities. Now that I'm an adult and, those fears don't necessarily plague me quite as severely, I'm now really trying to capitalize on that opportunity to educate people and share my culture with people and let people know that, like, this is a really beautiful culture of really awesome humans. And it's not the horrible things that you see on the news all the time.
That that also lends itself to the idea of representation, and it might come up if we might get there, but I think that you're definitely an ambassador, that I either want my daughters to look up to, for somebody who has had those experiences, that says, here's how you might be able to get through those experiences a little bit easier. I've been there. So that's great. I love that. I love what you just shared. Now, as you got older, and I've been there also too, as far as you talked a little bit about giving yourself grace now, which is so important. And I know what that's like, to give yourself grace for looking back and going, why didn't I stand up, or why didn't I do this or do that? But I think more importantly now, you spoke to the idea of community, and what did that look like when you got to college, and how did that transform the way that you looked at yourself, both internally and externally?
It was very much kind of a sense of belonging. Here's people who eat the same kind of food that I eat. Here's people who enjoy the same kind of music that I enjoy. And they don't make fun of me for it. And that was, I think, something that was really special. But not only do they not make fun of me for it, but they get it. Like, they understand why it is that I have these sort of things ingrained in me. Like, why do I act this type of way? Well, it's a cultural norm for me. It may not be a cultural norm for everybody, but these people get it. And so I think whenever I was able to find a fellow group of Iranian people, whether they were, directly from Iran going to university, or, fully Iranian that had been born here, or half Iranian like me, it was a really special sense of belonging. And also, I think, a really excellent opportunity for me to learn a little bit more of what the experience was from so many of these kids who had grown up in Iran and had come over here for university, what it was like for them. Also, for a lot of kids who maybe looked more Iranian than I did at the time, and what the growing up experiences were like for them here in the United States. And so it was a really exceptional learning opportunity outside of just being a sense of belonging. And so for me, it was vastly educational. I think gave me a pretty big confidence boost in who I was, and being confident in sharing who I was and where I came from.
That's great. So what core values were instilled in you by your family from that culture growing up that have contributed most to who you are today?
Yeah. My Iranian family are just like the most amazing humans on the planet. They're very warm, they're welcoming, they're open-minded, they're fun, they are so happy. And, one of the things is that I feel like all of us, all of myself, my cousins, my aunts, my uncles, everybody has taken with us, were lessons that came from my grandmother and my grandfather on my mom's side. One of their biggest focuses always for their kids was to be understanding of others, love others, communicate with others, be a good human. That was a massive, massive focus. And for them, like, there really weren't any religious teachings at all from my family in Iran. It was predominantly just focused around just be a good human, be a good person, be there for each other. And I feel like a lot of their teachings are a huge factor in why I think my family are just all around really good people, really helpful people, really kind people. And I feel like those are lessons that I've really taken with me heavily into who I am today as an adult, also who I was as a kid. I think that there were a lot of lessons that I probably had circulating on rotation in my head, even as a kid, that maybe a lot of kids at that age probably wouldn't have like thought of, considered, ruminated about, and what have you. And for me, it was something that was really important. It's funny because my mom, whenever I was in 8th grade, really wanted me to feel comfortable and fit in with the other kids. And so she was like, well, do you want American Eagle jeans? We go get American Eagle jeans. That's fine. That, the other kids wear it. You can wear it too. I was like, Mom, no, that's too expensive. I don't care. It's fine. Like, that's not something that's concerning to me. Which now I look back and I'm like, wow, like, all right, young Sarah, that was a pretty like adulty thing to think about. But a lot of that I think were lessons that I probably took from my family in Iran, and a lot of the love that they showed me and gave me, I think, really helped shape me as the human that I am today. But not only that, just the opportunity to really see the world, see countries that were different from my own. My mom did a really phenomenal job of making sure that I saw the world whenever I was young. I used to go back to Iran every other year, and we wouldn't just go and stay in the capital city. We would travel all around Iran and see all kinds of different people, all sorts of different styles of living and what have you. And then my mom made sure that I went to Europe as a student ambassador whenever I was in high school. We went to Italy, Austria, Switzerland, and France, learned a lot about those cultures. And I traveled to several other countries as well. And it, I think, was extremely eye-opening for me to see how other kids acted and were raised and what other lives looked like outside of my own. And that really helped me be, I think, a more open-minded human as I grew into adulthood.
Is there something that you saw in your travels, wherever it was in your age journey, that might be a myth that needs to be dispelled that Americans might have about people in other country, children in other countries?
Probably one of the biggest myths is that like people in other countries don't get it, or they don't necessarily. I think that this is going to sound kind of almost brutish, but like oftentimes I feel like people in other parts of the world are perceived as quote unquote dumb, right? But I think that until people have the opportunity to go to other countries and really experience what life is like with people outside of your cultural bubble, you get an opportunity to recognize that just because people have different cultural norms than you does not make them less intelligent. It does not make them less important. It doesn't make them less valuable at all. It's just a different way of living, quite simply. And then, introspectively, I think you tend to look at some of your own cultural norms and say, wow, like, I'm sure to somebody outside of where I live, this probably looks really dumb that we do this. However, this is an aspect of my cultural norm. And so that's something that I feel like is so important whenever it comes to traveling, is just that opportunity to see how other people live and recognize that there's not just one way to do things. There's a multitude of ways to do things. And just because somebody's doing something differently than you does not make it lesser than.
Well, hearing you talk about your family, it seems like foundationally your family in Iran and your mom, they just had this really loving, accepting way about them that wasn't based in, any type of philosophy or religion or anything like that they've raised you in. And I can feel that. And I've, like I said, I've read, the articles about you, and I've listened to the interviews. And what do you do now to continually, besides travel, continually broaden your worldliness, I guess, strengthen your allyship to other individuals who might not possibly have the privileges that you have? What are some of the tools or resources that you use for that?
Well, first and foremost, I love culture and I love history. That's been kind of a constant for me. And so one of the things that I love to do is watch a lot of documentaries specifically about different cultures and about, history and how things have changed throughout time. And I think that is one area where I feel like, a lot of my outlook expands, but I feel like a lot of where I've probably gained the most in regards to like my being open-minded to others and understanding and accepting of others is working in the hospital system. Because you see all kinds of different people. I mean, you see varying socioeconomic status, varying cultures, all sorts of different family dynamics, what have you. And I think whenever people are kind of in that bit of a vulnerable state, you learn a lot more about them than I think you would usually learn in regular everyday life. And as a result, people tend to open up a little bit more with you, like whenever you're their healthcare provider. Specifically for myself as an occupational therapist, we see our patients, if not every day, then at least multiple times a week. And so you kind of become that familiar face for a lot of your patients. And so it really allowed me to observe people as more than just whatever their label may be, whether it's like X culture or X socioeconomic status or whatever it may be, but rather the human that's within, right? And so I think one of the big lessons that I learned is whenever you approach people with kindness, even the meanest patient on your caseload, whenever you approach them with kindness and you hear them out, when you listen to them, when you're understanding of what their experience is, they very much change their tune. And I think that goes not just with people who are pissed off in the hospital, but people across the globe. And I think that's probably been one of the biggest lessons for me, is that you don't know what a person's circumstance has been, what their experience has been like, or even what their experiences in the past have been like that potentially, have ruffled up some emotions or what have you currently. But when you're understanding about it, when you're gentle about your approach and those things, and you listen, people very much will be open with you about who they are and very kind about who they are. And so I think oftentimes day to day, a lot of people don't take that approach with others, unfortunately. And this has kind of yielded a little bit of a clash in a lot of our relationships with people, I think, in the day to day. I mean, think about how bad road rage is nowadays. Now, if you put yourself in that human's shoes, like, for example, my husband has Crohn's disease, and it's so funny because anytime we're driving anywhere and somebody's acting a fool behind us in the car, he's always like, maybe they have Crohn's disease. Maybe they have to rush to a bathroom right now. Maybe it's somebody whose wife is about to have a baby, whatever. Whenever you're understanding and open-minded and I think willing to put yourself in another person's shoes, you can really find the good in everybody, which I think is something that's really special whenever it opens up a lot of doors, I think, for people.
Yeah, that's my colleagues and I, we talk about that too, just about, you never know what someone else is going through. It could be it's hard, but it takes practice like anything else, to we're so
100%. And this is kind of a little bit of a left turn here, but, I saw somebody post today that, right now we're kind of in this rat race of social media, right? Like everybody's trying to get to the top of social media because that's how we gain fame nowadays. And unfortunately, a lot of that has a tendency to come with engagement and engagement farming. And I think a lot of times what breeds a lot of engagement, unfortunately, is negativity, and specifically negativity directed at a particular human or population or subsect of humans or whatever it may be. And unfortunately, I think that's lent itself to a lot of kind of, I think, negative behaviors in society. And so I hope at some point in time that tune changes, because I'd love to see people, really taking a moment to think about what it's like in somebody else's shoes.
Yeah, it's, I've been asking this as a closing question, but I think I'm just going to throw it in the middle of this conversation here is I've asked the last couple of guests I had, how do you think we can obtain world peace? I also preface it by saying maybe we can't handle world peace as a humanity.
Maybe eventually, right? Like, I mean, never shut it down. But I think probably the biggest way to get there is going to be putting our egos aside, being open-minded, and being willing to communicate. I think so often we pull up our brass knuckles whenever somebody voices their opinion instead of just hearing them out and potentially presenting your side in a non argumentative way. And oftentimes you see some really exceptional conversations come out of that. And so, it's always going to be extremely difficult to have a large number of humans be accepting of a change, right? And so this could be something that's like eons down the road. But I think ultimately, if people were willing to put their egos aside, be open-minded, communicate with one another in a way that's not going to ruffle feathers, I think potentially that would be the way to get there. But how soon that could be, Lord knows.
Yeah. So I'm in a multicultural marriage also, and have you seen your allyship to either your husband or your husband's allyship to you? You mentioned you've been together since 8th grade. How has that changed and transformed? And what are some of the things that you've done to understand each other better, culturally? Because that's something that just doesn't come easy,
Yeah, I mean, it definitely doesn't come easy. That's for sure. His family's cultural norms are very different from my family's cultural norms. I know for him, it was extremely frustrating when we were younger that, I couldn't hang out as late as most, girls at school could. I couldn't go out and do the things that most of the kids at school could do, because I came from a very different household. But, I've learned to adopt a lot of his family's cultural norms and differences from what I experience at home. And I think he has the same. Actually, it's really cute, with him. He loves Iranian culture. He always says, us Iranians, we're his people. And so, he's tried to pick up Farsi. He speaks bits and pieces of Farsi here and there. Whenever I'm watching my Iranian shows and series, he likes to tune into them with me. He's a lover of our Iranian food, teas. I mean, I'll be honest, a lot of us Iranian people are extremely superstitious, and he's maybe not, jumped onto that bandwagon quite as much, but ultimately, he's been extremely understanding and accepting of a lot of the things that are in practice in my culture and vice versa. And I think, we've learned to really blend the aspects of both his culture and my culture that we hold dearest. And I think because we've been able to blend that, things have worked very well for the last 20 years for us. And, I look forward to the day that the two of us get to raise a kid in a multicultural household with, an Iranian mom and, our future nephew. My brother and sister-in-law are pregnant. My sister-in-law is Venezuelan and Cuban.
Wow.
It's going to be a very interesting multicultural household. And I love that for my future kids to be able to understand somebody else's culture and understand somebody else's way of living and what have you. And I anticipate, the American household will probably be seeing more and more of that as time goes on. So it's interesting to see and hear from people who do a podcast like yours, for example, how people are making this blend work. It's fascinating.
Yeah. And you led me into this question, which is what are some of the things that you've kind of mashups that you do with your husband's culture that are now your traditions or will become your cultural traditions going forward?
Yeah, I think in my culture, birthdays are celebrated, obviously, but maybe not to the degree that they're celebrated in a lot of Western cultures. And so that's something that we've certainly adopted a little bit more so. I think that my mom and I used to celebrate Christmas on a smaller scale. My mom coming from Iran, they really didn't celebrate Christmas. But of course, coming over to the United States, I think she wanted to make sure that I got to enjoy the same things that other kids got to enjoy. And so she always made sure that I had an Easter basket and I had a Christmas tree and so on and so forth. But the holidays are certainly much bigger now that I've married into a more westernized family. And at first, I think that was something that was a little bit overwhelming for both myself and my mom, because my mom has blended a lot into my husband's family as well. But now it's something that we really, really enjoy. We love being able to engage in these massive Thanksgivings and these massive Christmases and what have you. I think all of that has been something that's really fun and really special for the both of us as well. But, I will say Jake's family does have a lot of Italian aspects to them too. And I will say, a lot of Italian culture is very similar to Iranian culture in that we're a very food driven and family driven culture, both. And so that's been something that's, very easily blended for the two of us.
Yeah. And I was going to ask this earlier, but also growing up, it's funny, we don't think of it as like, I guess, like as kids, we don't think of it as a microaggression. For a lot of times people would be like, oh, you look Italian. I didn't know you were Mexican, or other things. Obviously, there were probably times because you have kind of a universal look that probably people thought you were from many other cultures.
Well, I will tell you right now, if I go to Greece, everybody assumes I'm Greek. If I go to Turkey, everybody assumes I'm Turkish. If I'm here in Texas, most people assume I'm South American of some sort.
Yeah.
And so, nowadays, especially as an adult, I think people are, they have kind of no idea what I am. I've had a couple really impressive people that are like, you're Iranian or you're Persian. I'm like, wow, that's impressive. But growing up, I don't know that a lot of people asked. It was more so like why are your arms so hairy? Why is the back of your neck hairy? Why is your skin so dark? Why does your food look like that? Why does your mom not let you go out past this time? As opposed to as much of the look potentially being similar to another like culture's look. But I think kids, especially at that time with lacking social media and what have you, maybe people weren't as aware of X look is similar to X culture. And so I think that's probably why I get a lot more of that now as an adult than I did as a child.
You talk a lot about education in a lot of the stuff I've read or heard you speak on. I want to learn something. How do you deal with a friend or a relative maybe when they have said something that might be considered a microaggression, or somebody you meet, maybe even in the space, and we haven't even journeyed really into the fact that you're female, which is a whole other dynamic that's layered upon all of this. So, but how do you educate or talk to somebody? Or are there times when you kind of just let it slide and how do you approach those things?
Well, I think, if anybody's from the healthcare field, you're very probably familiar with the term mirroring. So you kind of mirror a person's energy or, what it is they're outputting. And so I think it's very much for me, like you have to feel out the situation. If somebody's extremely agitated and pissed off and yelling terrible things, it's probably not the best time to have a thorough conversation with them about something that potentially could be mind opening. However, if it is like something that's more of like a microaggression potentially, depending on who it is, what time it is, and what have you, I oftentimes take that as an opportunity to educate. So like, I feel like this is an exceptional example. Whenever I was a therapist working in outpatient therapy, I had my patient and a therapist nearby me had another patient. My patient was pagan and the other patient was not. My patient heard something, the other patient heard something related to paganism, which my dad is pagan as well. And immediately started going off about how it's like satanic and it's witchcraft and this, that, and the other. And I was basically like, well, actually, my dad is, of this belief system as well. And this is how they believe. And the patient actually was like, wow, I had no idea about that. I thought it was XYZ. That's really interesting that you say that. Now, when I go home, I'm going to have to do a little bit more research about it. And so it's interesting, sometimes it can be met with some, people that don't want to hear something different than what their current beliefs are. But I would say more often than not, it's met with people who are like, okay, I apologize. I didn't realize that. I'm going to go do my homework now that I know that this is not exactly what I thought it was previous to your making a statement about it. And so when I can, I just try to gingerly and gently make a statement about, how something differs from what their current beliefs or what have you are. And oftentimes it's taken well. It's just a matter of kind of how you approach it. And again, the importance of kind of mirroring the person's current emotional state and what have you. If they're uber agitated and you retort with an uber agitated retort, you're probably not going to get a very good outcome, unfortunately.
That brings me back to kind of what I mentioned a few minutes ago about being a female. You've stepped into some spaces in the digital Web3 spaces. Iranian culture, is like a lot of other cultures, including the culture in America, is very patriarchal still.
Right.
How you seem very comfortable and very empowered with your cultural identity, your femaleness. Was that always the case? And I'm talking more now about being a female, or how did that develop over time?
Yeah, well, I will preface by saying that the vast majority of the women in my family on my Iranian side and on my dad's side are very strong women. They're women who have no shame about who they are, where they come from, anything about themselves. And especially watching my mom be such a strong woman. She predominantly raised me on her own. She worked like 60 to 80 hours a week. I watched her hustle, to raise me. And I think because of watching her, I have a tendency to really gravitate towards fellow strong women and be very, I think, just amazed by strong women. And I think because of that, that's something that I also want to emulate. And so I try to lead in a way that's unafraid. Just because I'm entering a predominantly male space does not mean that I need to be afraid. What's the worst that's going to happen? I mean, I'm going to shoot my shot. I'm going to do it respectfully, right? I'm not going to just like barge in there and be like, move aside, I'm here, But, I'm going to enter respectfully, be intrigued by the things that they're intrigued by, and just be, unafraid and unapologetic about who I am. And thankfully, I think for the most part, that's been well received. I think there's been some cases where it hasn't been well received, right? But one of my New Year's resolutions, like years and years and years ago, was to do things that scare me. And that's continued to be my New Year's resolution every single year. And that's, why I do public speaking, even though public speaking is one of my greatest fears in life. And why I enter spaces that are predominantly male, even though I'm a woman, or why I enter a space that's predominantly, tech focused whenever I'm really quite bad at technology, and more so an artist. Oftentimes you don't grow and you don't learn until you do things that are uncomfortable for you. And I think that's something that I've recognized within myself. And that's why I think I've continued to just walk forward and march forward despite any differences that I may have faced.
I really enjoyed seeing the new work you put together. You're calling it like the Heritage Collection. Tell us a little bit about that. And it sounds like there's also been some self-searching involved that has heavily influenced the new work that you're doing.
Yeah. Well, anybody who's unfamiliar with Iranian history, the regime changed in 1979 from having a Shah and his queen to what is the current Iranian regime, which is very, unfortunately, oppressive of its people, but especially oppressive of the women in Iran. And in 2009, there were significant protests against the current regime. And then again in 2022, when my mom was actually in Iran and we weren't sure if she was going to be able to get home. And, unfortunately, this regime has murdered just boatloads of people, including many women, children, young girls in their schools and what have you. And I think I'm, watching these people who are fighting for their freedoms for decades now. I feel so proud of them, but also empowered to raise my voice in a way that's most natural for me, which is through my art. And so really my heritage collection is meant to shine a spotlight on these women who have been fighting so hard for their freedoms, including just all around the Iranian people. But specifically, this collection focuses on the women of Iran, who are fighting for their basic freedoms, right? But I also want to shine a spotlight on the beauty that is our culture, which hence a lot of these organic and ornate motifs that you see in the background of these art pieces is I'm trying to shine a light on how beautiful our culture is. Like, it's just incredibly gorgeous. And I wish more people could see it. I wish this was a place that I could bring my husband to, but unfortunately I can't. And so I'm hoping that when people see these artworks, they start asking themselves, well, I feel like I don't know very much about this culture. Perhaps I need to go learn more about it. And then potentially somebody's going to say something negative about Iranian culture or positive, and maybe they can initiate a response or initiate communication that what I hope creates cultural change, because I firmly believe, as you know, education and communication are what creates the catalyst for cultural change. And, with enough ripples, I hope that that's something that eventually gets over to Iran to change what's happening over there so that the people are able to attain their basic freedoms. And so this is a big part of why I'm wanting to showcase this collection. It's extremely meaningful to me. I hope it's meaningful to the Iranian people, that, I'm trying as much as I possibly can to continue to raise their voice, even when media coverage has decreased on what their plights are and what they're fighting for.
That's amazing. Like using that art as a piece of activism too, and just, they're really beautiful pieces. Are they going to be shown somewhere? Are you doing a gallery, or are you doing prints, or what are your plans with them?
So currently, I actually just sold the first piece. So right now I have 3 pieces. I'm intending to create 5 total. I don't yet have any gallery showing set up. That is a massive, massive goal for me. I've already applied to a few open calls for a solo gallery show, but I'm waiting, of course, to hear back.
Sure.
But I'm hoping once I finish piece number 5 that I can really start kind of hitting the pedal to the metal and reaching out to galleries to see if there's a way that I could show these pieces so that people can see them in real life. And not to be like totally biased, but these pieces are like very, very striking in person versus on the computer screen or on your iPhone screen. And so I'm really hoping that this is something that I can potentially someday showcase in a gallery, and not just showcase the artwork, but hopefully showcase educational pieces alongside it. One of my big goals would be to showcase some of the clips, like the video clips from pre-current Iranian regime Iran back in the 1960s and 50s, when women wore bikinis and, men and women could ride a bus together and what have you, but also show some of these scenes from these protests that I think a lot of people probably are not familiar with, and just see how hard these people have been fighting to attain those freedoms for themselves. And so that's a goal that I have. So I'm keeping my fingers crossed that it's going to come to fruition one of these days.
I'm sure. Well, are you a vision board person or anything like
totally
that?
A vision board person. Yes.
Ditto.
Yes.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm sure it's just right around the corner then for you. A quick, is it tough to like kick these little birdies out of the nest for you, because they're it sounds like they're really personal pieces, and you sold one already, so obviously the family of them have already been separated. So
yeah, it's so funny that you say that, because when this first piece sold, my husband and I had a lot of anxiety about when these pieces sell, because we are both just so insanely attached to them. And so one of the things that I've been just so hopeful for is that when they sell, they'll go to a really good home. And my first buyer, bless him and his partner, they are 2 of the kindest people on the planet, so open-minded, so understanding. They're just so sweet. I mean, this first piece could not have gone to a better home. And so for that, I'm just eternally grateful. And I think that put a lot of my anxieties at ease, that I think that, the right homes are going to find these pieces, and that I will be, ultimately comfortable with parting with them.
That's great. So how do you balance this expression of like your interpersonal journey with all the art and everything else that's out there, like pop art and things like that? Just to kind of get into wrap up, I just have a few questions about art because I love it. I'm also going to go dig way deeper into Iranian culture. One of my past guests actually sent me the thesis that she wrote about Ethiopian art to read prior to. Yeah, it was absolutely mind-blowing. It was like I read almost all of the 80 pages because it was so interesting, like the Tigray area where she's from, like how it sounds. There's a lot of similarities, but how do you keep out all the noise of pulp culture? Or would you say that your heritage collection also infuses those types of influences, and you just really can't get away from them?
Yeah, well, I did incorporate the use of halftones, which are those little dots in the skin in these pieces. And I think for me, maybe that's a little bit of a nod to kind of like that Western heritage that I have. I've been a massive, massive fan of 1960s era artwork, pretty much my entire life. And, as we know, a lot of pop art utilizes this kind of halftone technique. And so whenever it comes to a lot of the noise that kind of comes in, especially nowadays, we have so much social media and Pinterest and this and that and the other. I notice that a lot of times I feel like my head gets really cluttered, where it's too much that's in there. But I try to kind of sketch out whatever is, bombarding my brain. And oftentimes once I sketch it out, I look at it and I'm like, yeah, I hate that. That sucks. I'm so glad I didn't put that on a massive canvas that I just spent a lot of money on. But more so than anything else, I think what really helps me kind of hone in on what I really want to focus on creating is a little bit of meditation. Honestly, my husband introduced me to transcendental meditation, and I feel like it's one of the things that's really helped kind of clear my mind and just kind of silence all the noise and helps me hone in. Also, I feel like sometimes one of the light bulbs, I'm somebody with a lot of ADD. And so a lot of times there's like 85 light bulbs going on and off all the time. But every now and then one of them just shines brighter than the rest of them. And that's kind of how my Women and Weapons collection came to life. My Royal Rebels collection came to life. And this Heritage collection came to life. There was just that one light bulb that I was like, that's the light bulb right there. And so it takes I think a mix of a few different methods for me to hone in on what I want to create next.
Are you self-taught as far as an artist, as far as somebody would call themselves self-taught?
I would say like 90% self-taught. My parents involved me in these art lessons back whenever I was a kid. And then whenever I was in high school, of course, you get free art classes. So why not take up on those? And so I did sculpture, I did painting, I did ceramics, I did like 2 years of ceramics, and I did film photography and digital photography back whenever I was in high school. But the vast majority has been self-taught. And I probably have to give a lot of credit to my genetics, because pretty much the entirety of my family in Iran, even these distant cousins that I'm finding through 23andMe, are all artists. And then my dad is a phenomenal artist, and so is his mother. And so I think a lot of it has also to do with my genetics too.
Awesome. And who are those 60s artists that you like?
Oh my gosh. Well, I love, this is where I get really bad at remembering names. Obviously love Warhol. I love a lot of, not necessarily artists specifically, but I love a lot of the advertisements from the 1960s era.
Yeah.
I love a lot of that like mod style artwork and advertising. I think it was so beautiful. I love a lot of the photography that came out of that time period. But a lot of what I love too comes from that era's architecture and their cars. I just love the shapes, the colors, the lines, the way that a lot of it came together. I find really, really beautiful. So it's not necessarily just fine artists for me, but a lot of, I think, kind of the global artwork of the era.
Okay.
So I'm very influenced by, I think, a lot of what I saw, obviously not me in person during that time period, but through magazines, through books, through
Do you
films.
believe in past lives?
Totally.
Okay.
Totally.
I was gonna say,
Yeah.
You probably do.
Yeah, you can ask my husband.
Yeah.
I'm like obsessed with anything 1950s, 1960s. We watch like all of the shows and all of the films set in that era. I'm sure it drives him crazy, but I'm also sure it's probably growing on him. But I love everything about it.
That's great. And so in closing, besides sharing where people can find you, what would you pass on to other biracial, multiracial individuals, words of support in helping them be graceful with themselves and finding out who they are? What would you pass on to them?
Oh man, I think one of the biggest things is just to be accepting of yourself and proud of where you come from. I think oftentimes people are asked, what is your ethnicity? And a lot of people tend to be scared to answer that question because they're not sure what kind of whatever is going to come out of a person's mouths. And, maybe that's going to be really hurtful. But I think you have to give people the benefit of the doubt and think about potentially this person is just wanting to educate themselves. And this is an exceptional opportunity for you to take all that pride in who you are, what your heritage is, what your orientation is, whatever it may be, and educate that person. And not only educate that person, but show that person, look, I'm somebody who comes from that background and I'm an open and understanding person. Let's be friends. And so ultimately, I think it's important to not be ashamed of who you are, but be proud of who you are and be open to sharing it in a very honest and authentic sort of way.
Awesome. And where can people find you?
Yeah, people can find me at pretty much all my handles are at Sara without an H, S Baumann, Baumann. And my website is sarabaumann.art. And I have all of my social handles on there as well.
Excellent. And I will be sharing those all off on like a blog post with all the information about you. And wow, I also was thinking maybe in the future, we have you and your husband talk about, multiracial marriage and partnership, and business. I think there's a lot of other alternatives, paths that we can go down. And I really, really appreciate you showing up today for this conversation that was not quite art focused, but kind of now describes you as the artist and human being that you are. So I really, really appreciate it. Thank you so much for your time.
No, I appreciate you so much, Antonio, for shedding a light on culture and heritage and orientation and everything. I think it's something that's so important to be spoken about, and it's been a very fun and unique interview for me, so I can't wait to share it.
Awesome. Have a great day.
Thank you so much. You as well.
Thank you for joining us for the Multiracialverse podcast. My name is Antonio Fernandez. You can find this podcast on Apple Podcast and Spotify. Huge shout out to my friend Johannes Skoda for mixing and creating the intro music, and DJ Kazam for the track.